Hey lads and lassies, we are back with part 2 on the Holy Trinity. So yesterday we talked about what the Trinity is generally, and today we're going to talk about where you can go wrong. And so we're going to start with the most common one, which is modalism. Now modalism is the idea that God has three modes, right? That there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they're all kind of partially different than each other. This is the one that is the most common thing that people run into, because this is the way that we usually like to talk about the Trinity when we use allegories, right? So one of the most common ones, and this is going to make all the Sunday schools teachers start quaking in their boots, because this is just something that everyone uses, but it's actually not true. Hopefully not you guys, but who knows, is the water, right? So people will say, well, God, the Trinity is like water, right? And the water has three states. So there's gas, there's the solid, and there's ice, which is solid, and there's liquid, right? And it's like, well, that's not really like the Trinity, right? Because those are three different things, three different modes of water, but they're all still water, but they're not connected with each other, right? So you can't be in a room and have all of those things happening at the same time or in the same place, right? So that's one part of modalism, and that's one of the biggest ones. And then you have partialism. Partialism is the other big one, and this is the one that St. Patrick ran into, if you believe the story about the three-leaf clover, right? So the story of St. Patrick, if you don't know, is the three-leaf clover. He used it to explain to the Irish what the Trinity was, which is why it's such a big Irish symbol and why it's a symbol of St. Patrick's Day. And so he holds up the clover and he says, well, this is like one clover, but there are three parts to it, right? The three leaves. And so you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, that's partialism. And what that means is that each one of those things is a part of God, right? And they're not by themselves divine. It's only when they come together that they're divine. Which is what that kind of entails. That's not what he believed or taught, probably, but that's kind of what that leads to. And so one of the other ways of thinking about this is like in Power Rangers or Voltron or any of those shows where all the heroes kind of form together into, like, they all have their own, like, I don't know, robots, and they all come together to form like a mega robot. Think of that, if that was like God, that would be partialism. So that's what partialism is. And I want to get to one that's like the biggest one, I think, in the church these days. And again, with some denominations and some ways of thinking, is this idea of Arianism or adoptionism. And we talked a little bit about Arianism when we talked about the Nicene Creed way back a few weeks ago when I was going through the Book of Confessions. And Arianism just simply teaches that there was a time when Jesus was not around, right? That he's not always been with God. He was basically formed and created by God, even if that was in eternity, but he was still not fully God all the time. And so it denied the equal status of the Son to the Father. And a way of talking about this is adoptionism, which is that Jesus was actually born a man and then adopted as the Son of God. And this is like very, very common, I think, where a lot of people might believe this in the background, and they didn't understand it. And a lot of people point to Mark, for instance, where adoptionists will point to Mark and they'll say, like, look at Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is baptized and then the Spirit descends, right? And it says, you are my Son in whom I am well pleased. And that's kind of where they would form their basis for that belief. And that's what adoptionism is. And of course, the retort to these is that, or the retort to Arianism and adoptionism is to look at the beginning of John, where it talks about God was with the Word and was the Word. This is just, it's something that people can easily fall into because you're trying to make sense of all these different information, and theologians have done no help in this category because they like to speak from their ivory tower. They like to use big words. I tried to avoid doing this, but I'm sure I even lost some of you along the way, even with these terms. And so it's very, very difficult to talk about this stuff in a way that is compelling or interesting to most people. And because it's not interesting or compelling to most people, they just kind of will look at the Bible or look what popular people say and then take that for granted. Or they'll take the easy way out, which is, standard human practice. So anyway, don't fall into those heresies. Remember, it's just one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. this graph right here is the easiest way for me to talk and think about it. So every time someone asks, I just draw it and I try to explain it that way. So just memorize this. Just put this in your memory. All right, everyone. Thanks. I will see you on Sunday for worship, and then I will see you again here in my beautiful apartment on Monday. Stay happy and stay healthy.